I'd like to welcome you all to our, what we hope, last virtual event of 2022. We managed to get an in-person event in September last year, but prior to that and following that, we've been virtual. But hopefully this will be our last virtual event. And I just want to give you all a save the date of the 25th of May, when we hope to meet you all in person. Before we get on to today's topic, which is very much around sustainability, I just wanted to give you a very quick update from a Wakefield Council point of view on some of the place activity that's going on. At the last one, we talked about the announcements of towns funding and levelling up funding. So on top of that, I just wanted to cover a few bits. You may have seen Sunday just gone. We got some great national PR coverage for Wakefield as a destination to visit for a tourism and culture destination. They used the headline "Wakey Breaky Art," which certainly made me laugh, but it was great. And that was following a familiarisation visit with journalists from our tourism team at the back end of last year. We're about to launch our inward investment video. This is a destination showcase for the Wakefield district, aiming to attract key sectors like advanced manufacturing, creative, digital and tech. There's an Experience Wakefield awareness campaign taking place in March, so keep an eye out for that. That's very much about getting the people of Wakefield and the wider region out exploring their area, but with that comes benefits to our hospitality and to our leisure sector. We'll be running a similar campaign for Wakefield First, so that is the business support facing arm of Wakefield Council, making sure that businesses know that we're here to support them, whether that's access funding, whether that's to help with recruitment. And then finally, stage 2 of the Wakefield Ambassador programme. You guys have been on a journey with us probably for about 7 or 8 months now. It started small. This year, we really want to raise its profile. We want to get more people involved. We want to get more speaking opportunities. We want to get some national kind of conversation going. So that's all coming this year. On to the topic for today. So following things like, COP26 and much media coverage, the climate crisis isn't going away, and it shouldn't, because it's a real problem facing the world, facing businesses, facing our population, and it's important that we act. Very aware that there are a number of things: supply chain issues, Brexit, staffing, COVID recovery, but obviously we can't cover them all, so we've chosen sustainability for this session. Wakefield Council has declared a climate emergency, which means we really need to act, and we need to act now. Our ambitions are to be a carbon neutral district by 2038 and as an organisation by 2030. And what this session is about is understanding that we all play a part in that journey. So our speakers today will talk about what their organisation is doing and the part that they play, but also hopefully inspire you guys and give you some ideas on how you personally and your businesses can help Wakefield District become carbon neutral by 2038. So we'll hear from Peter, Leighton Jones from the NHS, Kim and Alex from Arriva Yorkshire, and Alex and Marcus from Solupac. So enough from me. I'm going to get started, and I'm going to introduce Peter Leighton Jones, who is Head of Sustainability for the Mid Yorkshire NHS Trust. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Lucy, and good morning to everybody. So like Lucy says, I am the Head of Sustainability at Mid Yorkshire Hospitals Trust, so local very much in terms of the hospitals that we cover, which are Dewsbury, Pinderfields and Wakefield and Pontefract. But in terms of my background, I've only been in this post for a month. I just want to caveat everything I'm saying, so I'm not the font of all knowledge when it comes to the NHS, and it has been a bit of a baptism of fire in terms of some of the deadlines that are coming up, what we have to do quite urgently. But before that, I was at Wakefield Council for 18 months and set some of the foundations for their net zero and carbon neutrality work. So I've already met quite a lot of you probably on this call. And before that, I was at Leeds City Council for 14 and a half years, so doing sustainability work specifically. So definitely have a local government background and understand what needs to happen at district levels as well. But now I have a new hat, which is the healthcare sector. So I'm going to talk about 3 things really today: what the NHS is doing, why it's important in terms of the overall agenda, and then finish with what you might be able to do in your own organizational settings. So next slide, please, Lucy. You're going to get fed up with me saying that. But, so in terms of the NHS as a whole, there is a massive commitment now towards this transition for net zero by a reasonable time frame, I suppose, which is faster than what central government is imposing with the 2050 timescale. But it all came about really in a formalised way when the Delivering a Net Zero NHS strategy was published, which was in 2020. And that really underpins everything that we now have to do across the system. That's what the terminology is within the NHS, because it is very broad what we cover. You know, you get the CCGs, which are the more local primary care type of settings, so GP surgeries, and you've got secondary care, which are acute hospitals, and then you've got other things, ancillary services around things like mental health and public health, and all sorts of different routes of providing different types of healthcare, really. So it is quite complex, and all of the settings are very different, but this tries to encapsulate all of that under one strategy that rules them all, I suppose. But falling out of that, there's a requirement for each trust to produce a green plan to talk about what they're going to do. And that's what I'm tasked with at the moment at my trust level. But all trusts have to do that by the end of March at the latest. And there's also sub-regional bodies called ICSs, Integrated Care Systems. So they're a little bit like the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, which covers, you know, member authorities, local authorities, whereas this is about healthcare specifically, but at that sub-regional level. So in terms of the targets for what the emissions that we control directly, there's a separate carbon footprint versus those emissions that we don't influence. So third-party supply chain emissions, which are a bit more complicated. The target for those emissions that are within our control is 2040. And then we've got a more generous timescale of 2045 to address those wider supply chain emissions. But in terms of some of the institutions that are going to be helping us with this within the NHS, we are quite lucky that we have a branch now under NHS England and Improvement called Greener NHS, and they're providing a lot of the tools and resources and advice. And they've got a staff base of 150 already and rapidly expanding. And then there's also NHS Supply Chain, and they're the people that put our framework contracts in place, which we all call off from to a greater or lesser degree. But I think 80% of all NHS England spend goes through NHS Supply Chain contracts, so they have a massive influence. And some of those supply chains are global. So there is some, you know, significant power to incite positive change. And just, I suppose, a justification for all of this is that the climate change emergency is a health emergency as well. If we don't address climate change, it's going to create deleterious health impacts, things like air quality, excess deaths from heat, because we've been trying to adapt homes to deal with cold, but actually the reverse is going to become more prominent in the coming years. Flood risks also have a health impact, physically and mentally. And then there's some of the sort of macro issues, which I'm going to discuss a bit later on. But these are some of the key, I suppose, illustrations of our footprint that come out of that Greener NHS document. So you can see the white box in the diagram on the left are those emissions that we do control. So things like buildings, fleet vehicles, and also anaesthetic gases, which it might surprise you that anaesthetic gases are one of the biggest impacts in the NHS from a carbon perspective, because those gases are quite potent greenhouse gases. So they have a huge impact once they get into the atmosphere. And after people's surgery, they are vented, those gases, into the atmosphere as things stand. So the worst anaesthetic gas, called desflurane, is something like 2,500 times more potent than CO2. So you can understand why that has a big impact. Inhalers as well. So they have a propellant in them based on HFCs, and that's a really potent greenhouse gas. So there are things that you might not imagine that have quite a significant impact within a healthcare setting, which we're all now trying to collectively address. But in terms of the overall footprint, it's something like 25 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent across the NHS. And when I go on to one of the later slides, you'll see why that is significant. And that accounts for something like 40% of the overall public sector emissions as well. So probably if you move on to the next slide, Lucy, thank you. So this is the Truss carbon footprint, but that donut only covers the emissions that are under our control. So that is probably 25% of our real emissions. And most organizations are taking this approach because if you look at scope 3, it's very complicated, trying to analyze, quantify, calculate some of those emissions. So the starting point is to really look at electricity, gas, petrol, diesel, business travel, and the things that are relatively simple that you can quantify, water use, waste, for example. But it might be a bit of a surprise if you look at that table to see how low the impact is in terms of water use and waste use. But that's not to say it's not important to look at those things, but the impact of waste and water purely from a carbon perspective, not the resource wastage aspect, is quite low. So you do have to prioritize to a certain extent, but not forget about some of the peripheral things that have wider sustainability issues as well. So I just wanted to make that point, really. In terms of who we are, I'm briefly going to talk a little bit around this slide. So, we are a big acute trust. We have about 9,500 members of staff. So I don't know how many staff Wakefield Council have, but I think it's broadly similar. So we are, of the same ilk in terms of being a large public sector institution. We spend a lot of money. You can see there, more than £500 million. So we do have an influence, and if we could localize some of that spend, we could bring about some better outcomes as well. It's difficult because we are beholden to this centralized system to a certain extent, but I think they are releasing the reins somewhat and allowing us to think a bit more locally in terms of procurement and spend, and that is definitely something that we're looking at. Also 1.4 million patient contacts every year. You can imagine the amount of traffic that creates in terms of patient visits, visitor visits as well, and then all of the vehicular travel, patient transport, etc. that's involved, and notwithstanding all of the medicines that have to be administered as well and the impact of those. So we do have a big impact, a big influence. We want to be an anchor institution because we are rooted within the local community, and exert, a wide influence over what happens. And I think we should be working more with partners and collaborating to bring about some of these shared outcomes that we have around things like climate change, but also socioeconomic factors as well. So reducing health inequalities. There's a lot that we can do. And a lot of good work has happened, but we definitely want to move more into this space as time goes on. Next slide, please, Lucy. So in terms of what we've done so far, I don't want to claim that it's fantastic because there is still a huge amount of work to be done. And that's what the Green Plan is about. It's about cementing the plan for the future, starting with some of the short-term, easier to tackle emissions. So it's going to be 3-year increments that we're going to look at this within, so that we do see progress within discrete periods of time rather than having a 20-year strategy that's a bit, I suppose, shambolic in terms of what we're trying to implement. The anaesthetic gases, so I spoke about that really bad one, we switched to a much less damaging anaesthetic gas, which is only 20 times, so it's 20 times less potent than the one that I spoke about, but it's still bad. So there's still work to be done because the innovation, the next stage is to stop that gas from going to the atmosphere in the first place. So trying to siphon it off as it goes through the anaesthetic machines and then do something differently with it to convert it into other products that might be of use that aren't as damaging. But there's cost and, it's a process in terms of research and development. We have done energy efficiency work, primarily things like LED lighting, but not across the board. So there's more to do there. And also looking at things like building management systems and insulation. But one of the good things, I suppose, is that our CEO is very involved in this work. So we do have that commitment at board level. And I think that is important because it filters down, top down, and there is a thread throughout the organization in terms of responsibilities and accountabilities. It's very hard for me to go to people and just say, you should do this because I tell you to do it. It's much easier if I can go to them and say, the CEO says we have to do this. They're much more receptive and willing to change if you have that kind of commitment at that level. Single-use plastics, relatively simple in theory to address in catering functions, for example. So we have done work there, but more work to do in terms of being able to take the waste stream that's still created and do something productive with it rather than it going to general waste. Vegan options as well. So that's quite a surprise to me coming into the NHS that we already have vegan options in the canteen, because I didn't expect that to be the case, because it can be controversial. But I think giving people those options and being able to talk about the carbon impact of their decisions, the ethical impacts, the health impacts as well, is an important first step. But like I say, there's a lot to do, and the next financial year is going to be key in terms of catalysing that. Next slide, please, Lucy. And that's just a placeholder, so we can move on. So I like this graphic because I think sometimes a picture can paint 1,000 words, and I don't want to diminish, the toll that COVID-19 has taken on people's lives. It's killed people, it's serious. But I think what we're facing is an unprecedented series of existential threats, really, to the survival of humanity and the planet as we know it. So I think that this is quite a nice visualization of what's at stake, really, and how important this agenda is. If you could move on, thanks, Lucy. And again, this is just to illustrate where we're at the moment. So emissions have been rising year on year, steadily, well, not steadily, rapidly over the last sort of 40 years or so. And it isn't really clear if we've reached peak carbon yet, because we're at risk of bounce back at the moment, because economies are trying to recover from the pandemic. So the temptation is to look at development, growth, etc., which does have an environmental impact. But based on the current trajectory, I think even optimistically, people are saying 2.4 degrees Celsius is the level of warming we'll experience. But at that level, we're talking about potential societal breakdown, millions of climate refugees, so a humanitarian crisis with health impacts, but also the potential for conflict at borders, crop failure on a global scale. So really serious tipping points being breached as well, and almost irreversible in terms of a human lifespan, even across many generations. So that's what we're working towards and why it's so important. Next slide, thank you. A little bit about the context. So obviously we had COP26 recently. Some of the key things were around phasing down of unabated coal. What that actually means in practice is a tricky one, but that it was seen as progress because these things had never been mentioned before. Don't think it goes far enough, but that's for other people to decide, I suppose. Money, quite a significant amount of money has been set aside for climate adaptation, because these impacts are going to happen no matter what we do, especially in poorer countries. And then a deforestation ban in theory from 2030 onwards, and some targets around cutting methane emissions. I suppose the deforestation one, though, allows for a race to the bottom over the next 8 years, which I don't think is helpful when you set things that far in the future and say that only after that will you implement measures to reduce, I suppose, the impact of those activities. But I suppose from a UK perspective, we are one of the leaders, no matter what anyone says, and we could do more, obviously, but there is quite a lot of investment in terms of, in comparison to our peers, other countries of comparable size and richness. And there are opportunities in terms of job creation, and also some of the funds that have been set aside and mooted for the future, which hopefully businesses will be able to tap into to help move their work along as well. Next slide, please. Very, very quickly on this slide, this is just to show that despite all of the conferences we've had, the United Nations conferences over the last 30 years or so, emissions have continued to rise, and atmospheric concentrations of CO2 continue to rise as well. So to be able to take that graph down to zero by 2050 at the latest is a challenge like the likes of which we've never seen before, and it will require systemic change in terms of everything that we do across society and the economy. Next slide, please. So this is just to show the target. So Lucy's already said that the council's working towards a 2030 target for carbon neutrality as an organisation. It's going to be a challenge, but it's definitely achievable based on the work plan that I helped to initiate and others are now implementing. And the council does have quite good control over its own emissions. For the district, the sub-region and the trust, 2038 is a more realistic target, which will still be very difficult, but it's far faster than what the government is suggesting with its 2050 timeframe. So I think it's positive that we are trying to do that. And then this is the last slide on this section. It's basically showing what's happening at the district level. So you'll remember I said that the NHS, the overall carbon footprint was 25 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent. So you can see that the district of Wakefield is 10% of that. So fairly significant in its own right. The council's baseline is 35,000 tonnes. Mid Yorkshire is 23,000 tonnes. So not a huge difference between us and the council. Our emissions account for about 1% of the overall district. So we are both anchor institutions that have a huge carbon impact, and we should be taking a leading role in terms of reducing our emissions. And that's what this is trying to show. And the district as a whole is about 0.5% of the UK total, which on a per capita basis is what you'd expect. And that might not sound like a lot, but it is. And if every district takes, affirmative action to address its emissions, then collectively we can make a big difference. So what can you do? So we might as well move straight to the next slide. So I think laying the foundations is really important as a first step. So I've already spoken about board commitment, and I think that is the first thing that any organisation should do. Make sure the board is involved and everything is enshrined in what the organisation is trying to do from a governance perspective, and priorities as well, setting organisational priorities. Then there's a baseline aspect. So you do need to measure your emissions, and a plan, a strategy, a set of policies is important to underpin all of that. And I suppose nowadays there are a lot of tools out there to help you to estimate your emissions impact. So if you can get data for your electricity and gas consumption, it's very easy to work out the impact of that. And that's the first step. Again, with petrol and diesel, you can take those figures, look at your vehicle stock and work it out, miles to the gallon, etc. That's not that complicated. In reality, business travel, relatively easy. You can look at the mileages, you can look at the vehicles people are driving. You can make assumptions about the general impact of those vehicles. You don't have to go to the nth degree as long as you've got a robust set of calculations. So I think the carbon footprint of the organisation is relatively easy to quantify. It's the supply chain emissions that are more difficult, but using existing standards, metrics, tools is important, and a first step. And I suppose the council needs to signpost to some of those things, which is what we were trying to do before I left, and what I know colleagues are trying to do now, to make it easier for people to know where to look to find some of these tools, because there are lots of organisations now that are offering free assistance. They've got case studies, testimonials, workings out, so you can reverse engineer how other people have done things. So I'm thinking the Carbon Trust is one of those organisations, and the Energy Savings Trust as well. So it's worth looking at those websites. But just a few more items on here. So blockers, I think one of the biggest barriers sometimes relates to entrenched attitudes within the organisation. So it's not that we can't do these things or that the constraints are insurmountable. It's that some people don't want to do those things, and nobody really likes change. So I think having those conversations is important to try and unpick that really. Looking at your contracts and your supply chain, I think is a good, second step in all of this. So, and you don't have to do anything outlandish to start with. It might be that you just start a conversation with some of your bigger contractors and suppliers and just ask them what they're doing. So more superficial, qualitative, it doesn't have to be quantified, you just talk. And they will probably be doing things as well in the background. So being able to capture that is quite good because it helps you with your corporate social responsibility if you can piggyback on what others are doing and talk about that in terms of some of your literature. And then a few other things that you would imagine anyway, stakeholder engagement and actually listening to the views of those stakeholders. So, that could be customers, for example. And we are seeing moves increasingly towards things like green consumerism, which, creates commercial opportunities, and then communication as well. Next slide, please. So everything that you do really needs to follow the greenhouse gas management hierarchy. And it's relatively simple. It's a lot like the waste hierarchy, which you might have seen before. So obviously avoidance is the best thing, because if you can avoid doing certain activities, that could be a beneficial cost impact. Likewise with reducing. So you don't want to default straight to offsets, for example, because that's quite costly and it doesn't root out some of the inefficiency that might be in the business and also the cost associated with that. So you've seen that gas and electricity bills have skyrocketed recently. So actually it gives you a bit of a competitive edge if you can reduce some of your emissions. It's not easy because some of these things have got an upfront cost, but if you can justify a payback from doing something around energy efficiency, or you can consolidate your estate, or you can look at your fleet vehicles and say, actually, we don't need all of those vehicles and we can reduce the number. There are things that you can do around carbon that actually save money. It's not just all punitive, really. But then there are other things you can look at around where you get your energy from as well. Some of it might be a bit greenwashy, so it's important to look at the credentials of what you're doing. But there are options and they're going to improve over time. So it's just being mindful, I suppose, of what's out there. Next slide, please. I know I'm kind of at the end, but probably, I've got another 5 minutes. So if that's okay, Lucy, I'll carry on. So I'm just going to finish with a few of the main themes. So buildings and facilities, obviously. LED lighting really is a no-brainer. So if you are coming up to a time where you need to replace a lot of old fluorescent tube-based lighting, it's going to be phased out anyway, because the government doesn't want suppliers to sell it anymore, knowing the impacts. They want to kickstart this transition towards LED. So looking at LED options, I think, is a bit of a no-brainer, like I say, and the payback periods are relatively short. So yes, there's an initial cost, but you could be paying back that investment within 4 or 5 years, and probably sooner now that the bills have gone up. Solar PV is an interesting one because a lot of the subsidies were removed by government a few years ago, and that had a big impact on the economic viability of it. But now the costs have come down in terms of the supply chain and the equipment, and it's a bit more attractive, especially if you can put those panels on a roof where there's a bit of a base load that can take the power that's exported, because you can avoid the costs of electricity, which makes it more attractive and improves the payback of that decision. So it's worth looking at if you've got roof space on any of your buildings and you are a decent sized user, I suppose. Air source heat pumps are coming down in price, but at the moment it's difficult to justify, I have to admit, especially if money is a big issue. I think really local government and the NHS and people that have got better access to capital should be the ones to kickstart that, to give that industry economies of scale, and then hopefully the prices will come down for other people to take advantage of. And building management systems, very simple, can have a big impact in terms of just improving efficiency, looking at set points, having better automation over how everything works under a defined strategy. Next slide, please. Fleet vehicles, electric vehicle costs are coming down up to the small van level. Usually the business cases stack up in terms of relative parity of price when you look over a whole life basis. But I fully appreciate that it's more difficult for private businesses to build those business cases as compared to local government, because local government can borrow money close to the Bank of England interest rate, whereas you don't have that same option. So it's harder to justify to a certain extent, but there are lots of trials out there now, so people can experiment with the vehicles and you can learn more about how they perform and whether they're fit for purpose for you. And then some of the other things are around, well, linked to charging of electric vehicles. That is sometimes the biggest barrier. So you have to look at your building and what it's capable of housing in terms of some of this infrastructure, working with people like Northern Power Grid to see if there is that spare capacity. And I think one of the important things is that you should probably prioritize your fleet vehicles as opposed to staff and their electric vehicles, because otherwise you might be shooting yourself in the foot if you take up all that capacity with staff when actually they could be charging their vehicles at home or in community hubs or destination charging in car parks for supermarkets, retail, etc. But modal shift is something that you could consider for your staff commutes, which is something that's worth exploring. And there's a lot of information out there to help you to encourage that. Next slide, please. So behavior change and influencing, obviously important. I've mentioned tapping into ethical consumerism. You just have to be careful that you comply with the Green Claims Code, that it's all accurate and substantiated. Decision making, that's about governance. So if you have got that thread right through the organization in terms of everything you're doing around financial decisions, business decisions, and that's helpful. Carbon literacy. The Carbon Literacy Project has got some good resources. I wouldn't suggest that you deliver carbon literacy training to every member of staff because it's time consuming and expensive, but you can take some of their slide packs and retrofit it into something that is deliverable for you. Sustainable lifestyle. So if you can get staff thinking about what they do at work, that will filter down hopefully into their home lives as well. So I think that's a good thing to explore. We've already mentioned procurement and supply chains, and then that donut in the middle it's called donut economics, and it's quite a good paradigm to look at in terms of what we're trying to do is get humanity to operate in a safe space, so we don't go above an ecological ceiling and below a social foundation. Everything that we're doing is sustainable. So I think it's quite a good thing to look at because you can take quite a lot of useful inferences from it. Next slide, please. I just wanted to mention circular economy as well, because I think there's going to be a move more towards circular types of business. So at the moment, we have very much a linear system. So we take natural resources, we make things, we use them, and then they're wasted. But actually in nature, there is no waste. It's only in human societies that we've created this concept of waste. So trying to make those business models more circular so we don't waste materials and the feedstock of new raw materials can be reduced, I think is pretty fundamental. We're not quite there yet. It's all very piloty, I feel, with circular economy type thinking, but it's definitely something to be aware of because there could be opportunities to save money and maybe repivot the business towards a different model that will be able to tap into more ethical consumerism, for example, and save you money at the same time. And there are lots of resources out there as well around circular economy. And then this is the last theme. So there will always be residual emissions that are difficult to treat. So for example, if you've got HDVs, there isn't, a natural transition yet. Is it going to be hydrogen? Is it going to be electric? Very costly. It's not going to happen overnight. So offsetting will be required, especially if you're looking at tight timescales for your net zero targets of 2030, 2040. So where you do need to do those carbon offsets, which you want to minimize as much as possible, there are things you can do in terms of tying those offsets to biodiversity enhancement, because we are facing an ecological crisis as well, a mass extinction event. So if you can kill two birds with one stone is a wrong analogy to use, but tree planting, for example, the right tree in the right place, that can have a beneficial impact on carbon, air quality and biodiversity. And there are lots of schemes that you can tap into. So there's a White Rose Forest, which is our community forest that forms part of the Northern Forest. And there are opportunities to get free trees in certain situations. But the good thing about tree planting as well is it's a good CSR activity. So you could get staff planting trees within the community, and then that opens doors in terms of talking to potential customers as well, and just forging better links with your communities as well. And if you do want to do some of those offsets and quantify them and use them in your reporting, the Woodland Carbon Code is what you would do to facilitate that. And there's also the Peatland Carbon Code, which is a separate code, but along a similar vein. And I think that's still a bit more experimental, but rising in prominence and obviously important to look after carbon within peatlands as well. Your last default would be to go to international offsets, but you've obviously got much less control over what happens in some of those countries. And could you be certain that what they promised would actually happen? It does feel better to deliver some of these things locally or regionally or nationally, if possible. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. Sorry, it feels like I've probably rushed that presentation, but if you do have any questions for me, there might not be time now, but I'm happy for Lucy to share my email address if you want to get in contact to discuss anything. And hopefully that has been helpful.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. I certainly feel inspired. I think I've been lucky to hear Peter speak about climate change, the climate emergency, a number of times, and every time I learn something and every time I feel inspired, and hopefully you guys feel the same. As Peter said, any questions, if you pop them in the chat, and we'll make sure that we can share details. But we're going to hear now from Kim and Alex from Arriva, who are going to talk about the way that Arriva is kind of transforming bus travel and what the options are for businesses in Wakefield. So I will hand over to Kim.
Thanks, Lucy. Sorry, I've got more clicks in this than I would have if I wasn't presenting it myself. But I just thought I'd start off by giving a quick overview of who we are. So Arriva Yorkshire is a Wakefield-based business. So on the picture at the bottom there, you'll see that is our head office, which is up on Barnsley Road. So we're very much in the heart of the city. Quite a dated depot now, but I'll come on to that in more detail very shortly. As well as having our depot on Barnsley Road, we are also the owners of Wakefield Bus Station, which is a bit of a quirk in the bus industry. They're normally owned by the passenger transport executives. But in this case, we own Wakefield Bus Station and we manage it and operate it as well. We employ just short of 1,000 people in this district, and that's predominantly bus drivers, but we've also got a lot of engineers, cleaners and office workers as well. So we are one of the major employers, and those 1,000 people are out there delivering just over 300 buses every single day, which leave from our depot. Whilst we are a Wakefield-based business, we're also part of a wider group. So we're part of Arriva PLC, which operates in 19 countries across Europe. And the Arriva Group is owned by Deutsche Bahn, which is part of the German government. So we've got an awful lot of backing behind us. And with that, it enables us to move things forward really quickly, which is really pleasing, and to draw down on that capital that we get from our German owners, which is, again, very helpful in allowing us to deliver things. So people would often question, how do buses help Wakefield to become sustainable? And I thought Peter's slides were really, really interesting. And those of you who are paying close attention will have seen that on his slides, it said that 41% of all emissions come from road transport. And an interesting fact that many people don't realise is that of that 41%, actually only 3% of those emissions come from buses. Buses are extremely environmentally friendly. We are constantly making upgrades to our systems and using the latest technology. So it's a very environmentally friendly mode of transport. And actually, there's some very easy ways in which buses can be made more attractive to help move people from their car into the bus. And simple things like changes to road layout, where we get bus priority. There's nothing more satisfying than sitting on a bus as a passenger and zooming past queues of traffic, and knowing that you're getting to work quicker and easy, and actually being chauffeur driven in a several £100,000 vehicle to get you to your destination. Equally, bus only roads, so the likes of the Springs in Wakefield city centre, perfect, gets people right through the city in a way that they couldn't get by car. Park and ride sites are not something we've got in this district at the moment, but something we are very, very keen to introduce. What that can do is really take those most polluting cars out of the city centre and move them to the outskirts where there's not as big of an impact, and then use the environmentally friendly bus to get into the city. And as we said, bus lanes help us to get that priority straight in there and to make it more convenient for people. Because whilst we do appreciate that price is a big factor on whether people will use the bus, actually convenience is an even bigger factor. And people will only really shift over to bus if it's going to take equal or better time than to make their same journey as they would in the private car. And ways to help that are things like not making it as easy to find parking spaces. And just to give you an example, so many people on the high street think that the solution to a lot of the recovery of the high street is more parking spaces. But actually, if you look at the research, on average, over 50% of all customers to the high street come from public transport. And the people with the most, that are most likely to spend on the high street come from that mode as well. So people do travel by car, but more people travel by public transport, and they spend more in those businesses when they're there. Thanks, Lucy. Okay, so just talking more generically about the bus industry and how we play our part in the environmental crisis. We provide an essential mode for cleaning the air that people breathe, and there's 5 key facts that I just wanted to talk us through. So prior to the pandemic, bus was the most used form of public transport. So we accounted for 60% of all public transport journeys. So we carry far more passengers than the train industry does, although the funding wouldn't lead you to believe that that was the case. One of the most stark facts that I often hear and like to tell people about the bus industry is for every single double-deck bus, so one double-deck bus on the road, we can take 75 cars off the road. So not only does that reduce the emissions from those cars, but it also eases congestion. It makes everybody's journeys easier because there's less traffic for us all to be sat in. So a really key fact for us. And actually the bus industry added £64 billion a year to the economy prior to the pandemic. And we're certainly heading back in that direction and aim to be back there soon. On average, around 50 trips a year are carried out by each person. But actually, some people use the bus a lot more than others. Some people never step foot on a bus. And it's those people, we really just want those people to convert to, say, 1 journey a week. And that would make a huge, huge difference to their personal footprint on the environment. And a huge 5 million trips per day are used by bus in the UK, and there's a breakdown there of what people use them for. But the bus plays a really key role in the economy, in getting people around cities, moving people between businesses, and as I say, doing it in that environmentally friendly way. Thanks, Lucy. So you're probably asking, well, that's all well and good, you're asking us to use buses, but what are you doing about it? What do Arriva bring to the table? Well, for those of you who aren't aware, which I would guess is most, a brand new double-deck diesel bus at the latest emissions, which is Euro 6, they cost about £240,000 per bus. So they're very, very expensive. So our current fleet back in 2015, we bought 18 buses for the Wakefield district. We bought another 18 in 2018. And between 2017 and 2019, we upgraded 152 of the existing fleet to the latest Euro 6 emissions. So it's a fact to say that most buses in the district are more environmentally friendly than the private car, yet we can carry the equivalent of 75 cars worth of people on one vehicle. Additional to that, we've also got 22 hybrid vehicles in our fleet. And whilst they are still diesel, the benefit of those is that while they're at slow speeds, so typically within your city centres, they operate in electric mode. So again, very good for the city centre environment. Alongside that, we are bidding into what's called a zebra funding, which is a funding pot from the DFT. And for that, we are bidding along with the West Yorkshire Combined Authority and the other operators in the region. But for Arriva in particular and Wakefield in particular, we're looking to get 47 fully electric buses. Now, the difference with electric buses is they cost around £400,000 each. So they're very, very expensive, and the business case still doesn't stack up. But what the Zebra funding allows is it bridges 75% of the cost between a traditional diesel and an electric bus. So if we are successful, and we should find out at the end of this month, then we will be placing an order for 47 electric vehicles to go into the heart of Wakefield. Additionally, alongside that, we train our drivers in how to drive economically. So we want them to adjust their speeds to make sure that they're not consuming more fuel than they need to. We have the latest telematics systems. So every few years, really, we upgrade our system to get the latest. And that shows our drivers on an individual basis, on a route by route basis, how they're driving and how they can improve their environmental impact. And we also offer free travel for all of our staff and their families as well, to try and encourage them to use the bus. In terms of our property, I am pleased to announce that we are looking to invest in a brand new bus depot within the Wakefield district and within Wakefield city centre, ideally. So as many of you may know, our existing depot on Barnsley Road is extremely old. In fact, we still have tram lines in it from when it was an original depot, and it's past its useful life now. So we're looking for some land to be able to build a brand new state-of-the-art bus depot. It will be built in an energy efficient way, so things like solar panels. We will be looking to use wind power, all of the latest technology to make that depot as efficient as possible. And that will have the electrification in it to be able to charge the 47 vehicles that we're hoping to get the funding for. So huge investment in the city. And alongside that, Arriva was the first major transport operator in the UK to switch to 100% renewable electricity supply. So although our depots are quite aged, we are constantly looking at how can we make them more environmentally friendly and how can we do our bit for society on our premises as well as our vehicles. But I think the key point, and forgive me, Peter, but the key point that was missing from your slides, when I was very pleased to see that there was a slide in there around modal shift, because modal shift really is one of the solutions to the road transport problem. But the key bit that was missing was buses. So if you're asking how can buses make a difference to your business and what you can do to help the economy in Wakefield, actually try and encourage your staff to travel to your employment place by bus. And that's not always the easiest thing to do, but actually we're here to support you in that, and we can explain to your employees how they can make use of the bus, what their best ticket options are, and we can make that process a whole lot easier. So we do have flexible tickets. So since the pandemic, people's travel patterns have changed. They don't want to commit to a weekly, a monthly, an annual ticket. So we do flexible tickets. They can buy a 3-day ticket, a 7-day ticket, a 12-day ticket, and they get a period of time over which to use those tickets. So we're not asking people to commit to long-term tickets in order to get the best discounts that are available. And then additionally, we have specific deals for employers where we can offer discounted travel. And on that point, I'm going to pass over to my colleague, Alex, who's from our business to business section, and she'll talk you through what options are available.
Thank you, Kim. Hi, thanks, Kim, for that intro. As Kim mentioned, we do have various options available for businesses, specifically for their employees to use. We have a number of different options available depending on the industry, the background of the business, and what the employees are looking for and what the business can commit to. We have our corporate annual travel scheme. This is quite commonly a salary sacrifice kind of scheme. So the employer would purchase an annual ticket on behalf of their employees and recoup the costs normally, as I said, via salary sacrifice. We have the Yorkshire Zone, West Yorkshire and Wakefield Urban that would all cover this area available. I've put there the pricing of the annual tickets compared to the 4 weeklies. As with a lot of industries and a lot of businesses, the annual ticket represents the best value by quite a long margin. 4 weekly ticket is £74 for the Yorkshire. you'd need to buy 13 of them to cover a year's travel. So you are looking at a good representative saving on the corporate annual travel scheme. This is very popular generally with public sector businesses. Peter, I'd be keen to discuss this with you for Mid York's NHS Trust. We do have a lot of success with this scheme in the North East with the NHS Trusts, but it is available for any businesses, public or private sector. Next slide, please, Lucy. Possibly more popular with our private sector companies that we work with is our Employer Travel Club. This is a direct debit scheme. It is highly attractive for businesses to sign up to. It is free for you to sign up to. We will then make you a bespoke page with a bespoke URL. It'll be arrivabus.co.uk/your business name. You then share this with your employees on benefits platforms, portals, newsletters, emails. We can provide PDF posters for it for display anywhere. And your employees sign themselves up. So there's no admin on your side. We deal with all of that. There is also no minimum term for the direct debit. They can sign up and cancel whenever they want with no fees. The way that we price the Employer Travel Club, we give members the benefit of having an annual ticket price, but spreading the cost over 12 months. So there's no interest on the ticket price. It is the £740 that is the annual ticket price for Yorkshire, then becomes £58.33 a month. It's much more attractive. £740 in one go is an awful lot of money to shell out for a bus ticket, but it does mean that you can still benefit, and or your staff can still benefit from having that ticket price with the average day price, the monthly price, but without having to have the upfront fee all in one go. Next slide, please, Lucy. We also offer travel vouchers. This is a way, generally speaking, for businesses' clients to get on the bus. The voucher is exchanged on the bus for a ticket of the same denomination. We do single vouchers, daily vouchers, weekly vouchers. These could also be purchased by businesses wanting to use them as a taster for their staff. You know, purchase a few weekly tickets and see how your staff get on the bus before then committing to a corporate annual travel scheme or the Employer Travel Club. We have Yorkshire and West Yorkshire zones available. It does remove the need. This is more from a business perspective rather than from the environmental perspective, but it removes the need for any reimbursement or the using of petty cash for travel. And it's generally quite popular. Sorry, I thought it was a question pop up. It's generally quite popular with schools and colleges for after school transport for kids if they've missed a school bus or they're not going to be able to get on a school bus. Next slide, please.
Thank you,
and as Kim said, sorry, Lucy.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to refer back to what Kim had said and Peter's point about the amount of emissions that come from road transport. I noticed specifically on the Mid Yorkshire Trust, 10% of their carbon footprint is staff travel. Well, sorry, personal travel. 4% of it's staff travel. 9,000 staff members. You know, if we can get a third or half of them onto a bus, we've got strong routes around the 3 hospitals that Peter had mentioned, then, you know, that's going to make a world of difference.
Thanks, Alex. Thank you. Yeah, totally agree. And I think as somebody who I guess wasn't a frequent user of the bus, bus travel has changed so much. I mean, you can charge your phone on it. There's good Wi-Fi connection. So yeah, I'm a big ambassador of the bus. And as I said earlier, we will share Alex and Kim's details. And, you know, Alex is there for you guys to chat around ideas of how we can encourage more of your people and you yourselves onto bus. So thank you both. So finally, we've got Alex and Marcus joining us from Solupack, who are a Wakefield-based company producing sustainable products, and they're going to tell us a bit more about that. So over to you both.
Thank you. Morning. I'm Alex Thompson. I'm Managing Director of Solupack. I'm Mark McDonald and I'm the Sales Manager for Solupack. So, who are we as a business? We are innovators in that we are trying to develop new products that lead the cleaning industry forward. We're eco champions. So we try to make sure that whatever we develop has the least possible impact on the environment. You know, we make cleaning products, so we don't make anything better, but we don't want to make it worse. What we do is unique in that we control the whole manufacturing process ourselves, and we are developing a range of products that try to eliminate single-use plastic. We're formulators, so we develop the products ourselves in-house. We manufacture in-house, and we try to lead the cleaning industry into a more sustainable solution.
Next slide, Lucy, please.
Our mission is to be the leading producer of effective value for money cleaning concentrates packed in water soluble film sachets and made by adopting the highest possible ethical standards. A lot of words, but we'll demonstrate hopefully very easily in a few minutes what we're actually talking about. We envisage through our highly skilled and knowledgeable team that will provide a service that meets the needs of our customers and end users. We go for continuous development and innovation, and we guarantee that our product offering is of the highest quality and the best solution available. Our inclusive team practices, we try to evolve as a business and accomplish success together. And we're looking to become sustainable and eco-responsible in our products and practices throughout the business. Next slide, please.
Yeah, Lucy, if you can just share our screen for us so that we're pinned.
I can indeed. So bear with me 1 second, everyone. I'm going to end my slide sharing and get the guys up on the screen. There we go. Hopefully you can all now see them. Take it away.
So what we actually manufacture is little cleaning sachets with the cleaning chemical inside it. So if you can see that, this equates to 1 750ml trigger. So this is a fully biodegradable film and solution inside it. So all we do, if this was your trigger bottle, fill it with water and simply drop the sachet in, and then it instantly starts to dissolve. Quite simple, easy, and a cost-effective solution. So I'll show you that in a trigger bottle. So all you would do, fill your trigger bottle up, drop in the sachet, screw the trigger back on, quick shake. Now that is ready to use. It is a massive saving on plastic consumption because if we look here, I'll just show you this as well. So this drum here weighs 5 kilos. That will make up 50 doses of a floor cleaner. Our equivalent, which is a pack like this, that weighs 300 grams and makes up the equivalent 50 doses as what that does. As you can see, a lot smaller and a lot lighter. Next slide, Lucy, please.
Thank you. Let me go back to sharing my screen. Hopefully you've joined me back at the slide we were at.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you, Lucy. So our business has been around since 1998. It looks very different now to what it did at that point, although the principle of what we were trying to produce was the same. So we've been very much ahead of the game in terms of what we've been trying to deliver to the marketplace. Next slide. Video. So at an early stage, we were able to deliver a reduction in single-use plastic. We eliminated shipping water around the country, massive reduction in transport, and we were trying to eliminate harsh chemicals. The focus from the customer base at that time was particularly on cost, convenience. They were happy with harsh chemicals. Very much a lack of education and awareness of what the environmental impacts of cleaning products were at that point in time. Then in October 2017, the UK opened its eyes to this ever-growing issue, and thanks to Mr. Attenborough, who we regularly send a Christmas card to now, virtual of course, he made people aware of the massive impact of plastic waste hitting the environment. So now the customer focus is completely different. People are looking for sustainable products all the time. They're looking at the plastic content. They want to avoid palm oil introduction. They're looking for UK produced and sourced. Often they ask for chemical-free, which is, frankly quite ridiculous because even water's a chemical, so we're not really sure how that can be achieved. They do talk a lot about things being natural, zero waste, vegan, net zero carbon, and that's the last one now because that was popped up.
Cruelty-free.
Oh, cruelty-free, yeah.
So just alliterating on some of that there. So the packaging that we use is compostable packaging. And the reason why, like I said, people are trying to look at net zero, reduce waste, and that's where our products come in. If you look at a plastic container that weighs 250 grams, our equivalent waste only weighs roughly about 20 grams, but is also compostable. So in reality, we have no waste. That's how the product's designed, is that the bottles that we supply are bottles for life. So you should never need to change the bottle, which is eliminating all the single-use plastic.
So if you look at some of the range products that we have there on the left, we pretty much have a product that will do most cleaning applications required throughout industry. But we make a big focus on developing from the ingredients upwards. So we look at the raw materials. We try to use the most sustainable raw materials we can find, from surfactants through to additive chemicals. As Marcus has mentioned, the packaging we look to use compostable. From a waste aspect, we have very little hitting the environment from a waste aspect. Nothing really is generated from our production process, and very little from the product usage.
Yeah, so just on that, one of our main customers that we supply is a large, not fast food, I would say, but
bakery chain.
Yeah, a bakery chain, and they switched over to our products 5 years ago. They were using concentrates, ready-to-use bottles, and they've lowered their waste. They used to get 4 bin empties a week. It's now dropped down to 1 bin empty a week. It's a huge difference just by switching over, because the problem with a lot of these bakery chains, they don't have compactors on site, so they can't make that plastic bottle any smaller. Whereas with our product, once you throw it away, it's as flat as a piece of paper. It makes a massive difference. And like I said earlier, some of the packaging only weighs roughly 8 grams when it's empty, as opposed to 250.
So in terms of our business development, we look at our production processes to make them as efficient as possible. So we produce the sachets in-house. We can produce 300 a minute. which equates to about 70,000 per shift per machine, which when you start looking at the relative tonnage that would be if you bought conventional products, you're talking in hundreds of tons and very, very significant amounts of plastic that are generated. We have carbon calculators and plastic calculators that we provide to our customers so that they can look at what the reductions they will achieve if they move over to our product range. We obviously make sure that our business travel is as low as possible now. We do use as much online meetings as we can, particularly Teams. And from a product delivery point of view, we have a 90% reduction in volume and weight to deliver equivalent amount of our product compared to a conventional product.
So just to put that into real terms, a pallet of our products, which will give you 16,800 trigger sprays compared to conventional. So one of our pallets is the same as 36 pallets of conventional chemicals. When you work that back, and as we talk about transport and CO2 emissions from vehicles, which, like everyone said, 41% is down to transport. When you actually look at it this way, that's a truck and a half is what you would have to send the equivalent out of compared to our chemical.
We make sure that our team are fully aware of what we're trying to achieve. We invest a lot of time and money into developing the skills of our team and particularly focusing on sustainability and environmental impact. Our waste is minimal from the business, and we try to make our process as efficient as possible in terms of LED lighting, the heating systems within the business, and the efficiency of the machinery. And from a supplier base, we try to buy as much as we can from a local supplier. Our main suppliers are within Yorkshire. Admittedly, some of their sources are more worldwide, but we can only control what we can control at the end of the day. We make sure that our products are accredited to the highest standards, so that we ensure that what we're sending out to the marketplace just doesn't sound green. We try to make sure that it actually does the job that it's intended. So all our products are Vegan Society approved. They're all cruelty-free international approved. They're all made in Britain, Planet Mark certified. We operate to ISO 9001 and 14001. And where applicable, we're looking at eco level approval. We are part of Sachets and part of Make UK and the CHSA, which is the Cleaning and Hygiene Suppliers Association.
So the Planet Mark, just to go over that a little bit, so that's just about us as a business, how sustainable we are, because we're okay trying to get other people to be more sustainable and lower their carbon footprint, but we have to be seen to doing it as well. Like I said earlier, just daft things of changing your lights can make a huge difference.
So sustainability success, we began this business with 2 people, and now we employ, as an SME, about 25 people around the Wakefield area. And why Wakefield? Well, we find the Wakefield district is an excellent catchment area for staff, so we keep our own carbon footprint as low as possible, and we have as little impact from our attending staff as possible. We find that Wakefield has an excellent network of supply business to support us, and that covers logistics, engineering, packaging suppliers for corrugated and general packaging, and of course temporary labour. And we're only as good as the team of staff that we have here on site. And we are brilliantly supported by the We Are Wakefield team, who help us optimise in terms of networking locally.
So just to let you know, we currently supply TK Maxx, who's obviously based in Normanton, is their main distribution warehouse. And just to give you a little bit of figures on what they actually save or will be saving, we've not got everything, but it will be more. So we've worked out that if they use a certain amount of things in their 140 stores, they would save just over 9 tons of plastic per year, 53 meters cubed of waste, and also 63 tons of CO2 emissions by switching to our products. Now, this is every year as well. So it's a huge amount of plastic that they will save. And, you know, we want to do this with more businesses. You know, on the call today, we've got Arriva, we've got the NHS. If we can get more businesses to switch over to these products, it will be, you know, great for the environment. We don't call ourselves eco-friendly anymore. We call ourselves eco-responsible. The reason why our products aren't falling into the environment, they don't make it better, but what they do is they reduce everybody's impact on it. You know, because like we said, we do need to take chemicals out of the ground, you know, and what we can do is reduce everybody's impact on it. And that's what we need to do. You know, we're never going to, by using chemicals, we're never going to make the planet better. But what we can do is, like I say, reduce everybody's impact on it.
And because of the way that we package up the chemicals, so it's the right dose for usage every time, we don't use any excess chemicals. It's always that unit dose. So just as sorry, if you can go back, Lucy, sorry. We are close to launching what we think is a very exciting and innovative supply system for cleaning products. Particularly, well, we're going to begin in the Wakefield area so that people can buy local and minimise their impact on the environment. And this will be, what we're aiming to achieve is a completely packaging-free system that will be delivered to local businesses. So this is something that we're going to start to advertise in the next month or so.
Yeah, next slide, Lucy.
Okay, and we understand we have to walk the talk, and we have a full sustainability report we would be happy to share with people. Sadly, I think that cartoon on the welcome page is meant to be me, but
it's got more hair.
But what we're trying to illustrate is that we do go into the whole aspects of sustainability for us as a business in great detail. We're proud to be made in Yorkshire, and very much for listening.
Thank you both. Thanks so much to all our speakers. I hope that you guys as ambassadors and people within the business community of the Wakefield district feel inspired by what you've heard today. We understood that the climate crisis and the climate agenda and sustainability and what we can do it is quite a daunting subject. So what we wanted to make sure was that we didn't just talk about it and how important it was, but also really understood what businesses in the Wakefield district are already doing, and actually what these businesses can do for your business and how they can help you think a bit more sustainably, or look at, you know, whether it's kind of bus initiatives to get your staff on the bus or cleaning products. But hopefully you've found this session really useful. We'll be carrying on the conversation about sustainability over on our social media channels. So if you can join us on Twitter at Wakefield Ambassador, or on LinkedIn if you search the group Wakefield Ambassador Programme. We'd be keen to hear all your thoughts about today, what you've learned, what you're going to take away, what you and your business are already doing for sustainability, and just really carry on that question and answer opportunity. So any questions, pop them in this chat and we can take a look and get back to you, or let's carry on the conversation on social media. So yeah, finally, a huge thank you for joining our hopefully final virtual event, and we will see you all in May in person. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lucy.
Thanks all. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers, Lucy. See ya.
Thank you, Lucy.
You're very welcome. Thank you.